The Vera Tommy Show. The Vera Tommy Show. The Vera Tommy Show. The Vera Tommy Show. Let's talk about it. 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 On the Vera Thomas Show. Let's talk about it. Yeah.
Hello. I am so excited today. We're going to be talking about some pretty serious things today. We're going to be talking about trans children and being a parent of a trans child, but we're also going to be talking about some things that women go through that can be devastating and traumatic, and some of the experiences that my guest Amber Hollowell has experienced through her young life. And she's not that old, but yes, she's been through a lot. How you doing, Amber?
Pretty good. It's good to be here. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad to have you here. And before we start with our dialogue, I am going to share with our audience a little bit about you, and then we're going to get into some deep dive stuff.
Sounds good.
Now, of course, now she is a remote health advocate and audio room host on LinkedIn. She is a survivor of so many things that we're going to be talking about. So many things that I don't want to even say on here because we're going to talk about it. She's 9 years in remission of cervical cancer caused by HPV given to her by her ex-husband from one of his affairs. She has two youngest children, were both diagnosed with the autism spectrum umbrella a year apart. Both at 22 months of age, they were diagnosed. One has a sensory integration disorder, and the other has an auditory processing disorder. And we're going to talk about both of them. Were integrated into normal classroom by kindergarten. However, both still exhibit very mild tendencies. Her oldest was diagnosed in high school with ADD and she was diagnosed at 33 with moderate ADD, along with a language processing disorder like her middle child. So she's a caregiver for her father during his short melanoma. I can't pronounce that. I'll let you talk.
Melanoma.
A melanoma. Okay. Battle until he passed in 2015. And she's finishing a parental guidebook on communicating with a trans child, along with an actionable workbook to be published. So Amber, I don't know why I had a brain freeze with that name, melanoma. I
That's
should
all
know
right.
better. But
They're all
anyway,
hard. Like metastatic, even though I was in nursing school, metastatic was the hardest word for me to get out for the longest time. And I don't like, I would trip over it over and over and over. So, yeah, lots of medical terms do that.
yes. Now, let me also say before we get started, audience, you can support me by sending stars. Stars help me earn money to make more content like this. So please support me with stars. All right. So, Amber, you have quite a story. So, and a lot of what you've gone through, I've kind of experienced myself. But we want to not only talk about being a trans parent, but also the difficulties that you've gone through throughout your life, and then to be challenged by children that may have had some challenges themselves.
Right.
So I'm going to ask you to take a few minutes and just kind of share with our audience a little more about Amber Hollowell.
Okay. So I have a trigger warning to the audience. I have a pretty trauma laden background. If you will, I was trauma engineered. As a young child, I was molested by a family friend, and then I was raped as a teenager. My marriage, I was actually involved with someone who was very narcissistic, who had very controlling tendencies. He was in the military, and that just continued. And that got to a head where there was beginning to be some physical signs there that was going to get aggressive, and I walked. Um, and I really, that was after the affairs. That was after the cervical cancer. Actually, I hadn't gotten diagnosed with cervical cancer just then. I was being treated for it with some of the earlier stages. I hadn't actually moved into the cancer yet. And then once it went into cancer, I lost just about all of my cervix was removed. I was stage 2, and I have been in remission like over 9 years now. And the next relationship, I didn't really learn from my red flags. And actually, I learned that a lot of that was because the trauma, again, that I went through. It was almost like I was engineered to ignore it because I'd gone through so much of it. I just treated it like it was something normal. And so the next relationship that I was in was extremely abusive, and the person had a substance abuse disorder. And because I worried about their health and whether or not they were going to die from this addiction, I tolerated the abuse. I didn't want to kick someone out of my home so that they would die. I felt like I was going to feel really, really guilty for that. So I tolerated that behavior for about a year and a half until it got so bad. I had gone through 2 different concussions in about a 2-week span, damage to my peripheral vision, broken bones, the damage. It was just long term, over and over, damage after damage. And once I got out of that relationship and did a lot of therapy, I realized that a lot of it was that I was missing those red flags. And from missing those red flags, part of that was realizing why I missed them. And I had gone to school for nursing and decided I didn't want to do that when my dad was sick. And I had kind of moved into nursing school again right after his death. And that was caregiver burnout for me. Like I was just kind of putting one foot in front of the other because my dad wanted me to go back to school and wanted me to accomplish that degree. And I was so blindsided that this was the goal. Let me get to it. It'll be what he wants. That time I was getting really close to it, I was like, this isn't what I want anymore because of the caregiver burnout. And through that therapy, I just learned that my voice had been stolen and had been taken in all those situations. And that my reason, this fight for me that I have in me for bodily autonomy, for people's rights, is because mine were always being stripped. And I didn't want anybody else to experience that.
Right. Let's pause for a minute. We have some comments. Cooper Gates, he says, glad those children were diagnosed early. It's frustrating and misleading when it's late. That's one of the things I want to kind of talk about as we go on. And then he also says, year after year of seeing it on ingredient labels went by before I could pronounce. Okay.
Yep. Yep.
All right. We know what you're saying. I'm not going to try to pronounce it. And then Diane, she says, she said, you right, we cannot post on all platforms.
Right.
You can post on Facebook, on YouTube, and I think you can post on LinkedIn. But she is saying that your glasses are
Yeah, I pulled them off.
reflecting.
I pulled them off. They always reflect. I'm just to tell you, you're going to have to read the questions because I am. That is now blurry for me, and I'm not.
Okay, no problem. No
That's the
problem. The
only
only
reason
reason
I wear
why
it.
the only reason why I can see them is because they're close. I wear glasses too, but I don't,
Okay.
okay, and then Dr. Diane Sorrentino, she says, what else is new? Says another person with glasses.
So she gets
Yes.
it.
So you get it. You get it. You get it. Okay, great. All right. We do want to make this as light as possible, given that this is such a traumatic conversation that could trigger some
People.
people. But I do want to talk about, you said that it was almost like a cycle.
It was.
You experience abuse as a child, and then you got married into abuse, and then you divorced and married someone else that was abusive.
I didn't
Now,
marry him, but I did get involved in
oh,
another relationship that it was actually, it was abusive. Whereas the first one, my marriage had been this emotional, psychological abuse the entire time that was beginning
yes.
to verge on physical. And that's why I left the relationship. This one
Let's
just
talk.
went straight into the physical.
Okay, let's talk about this,
Okay.
because having grown up with some emotional abuse myself, physical, emotional abuse, being belittled and ridiculed and all that kind of stuff. What happened with me was I recognized that I did not want to raise a child feeling the way that I felt. So there were things that I
Yes.
worked on to make sure that that didn't happen. But in terms of marriage, I married into an abuse. It ended up being an abusive situation because during the engagement, I never saw any of that stuff. Okay. And
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't until after we were married
Yep.
that I saw these signs of mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual abuse. And it wasn't, I remember we had an altercation, and his mother said to me, oh, there are many places in my house where I have walls where he's gotten angry and hit the wall. And I said, I wish I had known that before I married your son, because I would have never married him. But anyway, I did, and I tried. When you're in an abusive situation, you lose yourself. You
You
lose
do.
your confidence, you lose your self esteem, you lose your identity, you lose everything about you. Prior to getting married, I was so confident. I had worked on myself,
Right.
getting past all the negative things I had heard as a child. I had worked on myself, and I had become confident and self assured and all this stuff. And during the course of that marriage, I lost it all.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
lose it
And I
all.
don't think I didn't even have it. Like I didn't have that. I'll be honest, I didn't have that confidence. I didn't have that self esteem going into my marriage. Um, and so the marriage just made it worse. And I think by the time I hit 30, I remember looking in the mirror and going, I don't know who you are. I didn't recognize myself. I had bent and molded and changed every time he bullied, every time he ridiculed, every time he insulted. I don't like you wearing that. Women who look like you shouldn't wear this, shouldn't wear that. And those little derogatory comments would happen repeatedly until I stopped wearing it. So I'd stop wearing it. Whether it was
And
the makeup, the way I wore my hair, it didn't matter. He would ridicule until I stopped.
let's
And
talk about.
so that person in the mirror was just like, this isn't, this isn't you. And I had read a book, and honestly, at the end of the book, I was just like, yeah, I need a divorce. I'm not happy here. And that I realized that God wouldn't want me to be unhappy was the other part of that. But that the bigger section of that was like I was allowing him to do this to me. It was more than just he was doing it to me. I was allowing him to do
Let's
it.
talk about
And
that.
I had
Let's
no
talk about
boundaries.
that.
I had no boundaries.
Let's talk about this, okay? Because
Definitely.
a lot of times you hear things like, you made me do this.
Right.
Or you hear things like, if it wasn't for you, when in actuality, we have to recognize that we have no control over how other people relate, react, or respond.
Right.
The only thing we have control over is how
It's us.
we relate,
Mm-hmm.
react, and respond. We cannot. Now, it takes a while to understand and get to this, but once we understand that, and Eleanor Roosevelt, and I say this all the time, Eleanor Roosevelt, she said, no one can make you feel inferior without your permission. Let
Yes.
me let me further say, no one can make you feel any kind of way without your permission. So
Still learning that.
understanding, and it's a daily job. Okay, Cooper also has another comment here. He's saying, and metastatic
Metastatic.
only shares one syllable with metasize. Okay. All right. Thank you. We're getting off the word kick right now. We want to kind of talk about some of these issues and things that women are going through and that they need to understand. And women clearly understand that you do not have to accept being treated any kind of way. You do not.
No.
Most of the time we do that because we don't have that confidence within ourselves that we can do without.
Yeah, that's part of it. I think the other part of it, like for me, it was because I had children. And my children, I wanted to keep that marriage. I wanted my kids to have both parents. And my ex had already threatened me multiple times that if we broke up, it was all of us or it was just me and the kids. He could not be a part time dad. He was going to walk.
Well, you know what? The thing is, and that's enough. I want to talk about that because so often women stay in these abusive situations because, and they say it's because of the kids. But
Yep.
what we fail to understand is when we allow and subject our kids to being in that type of environment, it
Yep.
clearly impacts on them emotionally, physically, mentally,
Well,
spiritually.
for a long time in mine, I will say that all the abuse, all the psychological, all the emotional was always aimed at me and only me until my children started to hit the age of about 10. And that's about the time where your kids start to come up with their own ideas and start expressing their own opinions. And so it was suddenly like, no, you can't have a different opinion than what I want you to have. And then there was suddenly this tension between him and the kid. And then the next kid would start to age up and there'd start to be tension there. So by the time he got physical with me, and when I say physical, he raised his hand at me. And I stepped into his face and dared him. I had never done that before. I'd never stood up to him before, but he had never raised his hand like that at me either. And I was done. That moment, I had already made up my mind I was going to stay until my kids were out of high school. And that moment was like, nope, you're out now. Pack your things. And
Um,
honestly, when I stepped in his face and said, I dare you to hit me, he backed away and turned around to walk off. And I grabbed him by the hand and I spun him around again. And I said, no, you're not done. I'm not done. You have treated me horribly. And now you're treating our kids that way. And it was okay when I was just your punching bag, but you will not treat our children like punching bags. And better yet, you will not teach our son it's okay to treat women this way. And you will not teach our
absolutely.
daughter that it's okay for her to be treated this way and accept this behavior from a man. And I had tolerated it.
Absolutely.
I tolerated it up until like that was my limit at that very moment. And buddy, he packed his bags and moved out that day. There was no coming back. We were done. Boundary crossed. And I think
And
that was maybe
see,
my first boundary. That was my first boundary going, oh, I do have boundaries. Put this up. No,
yeah.
I'm not taking any more of that.
And I want to talk about that. I want to talk
Mm-hmm.
about boundaries. But one of the things, like with me, I took it up until the time that my ex-husband, he attacked me in front of my son. My son was only 3 months old, so he wasn't aware, you
Still,
know, but I knew that I was not about to raise a child in that kind of environment, which
right?
is what made me leave. It took me 3 months to get myself situated, but I raised my son from the time he was 6 months old, and never remarried. And that's because of signs. When you see signs, when you've been through stuff, and I want to
Yep.
kind of talk about some of the signs that women need to be aware of and cognizant of, and men too,
Right. It does. It
because,
does happen to men too.
oh,
Not as
definitely.
often, not as often, but I will say that I think it's probably 10 times harder for a man to come out and speak about it than a woman.
I'm sure that is the case because, and when I want to talk about some of these things that should be red flags and also
Yes.
should be boundaries. And, and I may go beyond because I remember breaking up with someone because he called me a knucklehead, right? And I was done
That's it.
because that's it. You don't call me out of my name, period. I don't care if you're joking or anything.
Hmm.
You do not call me out of my name.
Right.
And as a result of him calling me knucklehead, I was like, oh, nope, I'm done. I'm done. And he couldn't understand why I would be done. And my thought is, you call me a knucklehead now, you
What
get
will you call
very,
me?
yes, exactly. So I'm done. So
Yeah.
anyway, having these boundaries, what is it you will accept? What is it you will not accept? And I wrote a poem about this also that I may share, but I want you to kind of talk about some of the red flags that you saw that you want to share with the audience.
I think some of my biggest red flags were, and the problem was like in the next relationship that I moved into that was abusive. It didn't matter if I saw the red flags. The abuse was so common in that relationship that it was just keeping your head down.
Wait a minute.
Um,
Wait, let me back up.
mhm.
You said it was you were in how long were you in this relationship before
18
the
months. 18 months.
when did the abuse start?
Only a few months in, but he was already moved
Okay.
into the house. And once he moved into the house, I didn't, about the same time the abuse started is when I realized he had a substance abuse problem. I didn't know he had a substance abuse problem. And I
Okay.
realized that that substance abuse problem was so significant that if I kicked him out, he would die. And that's not me being over exaggerating. That is the God's honest truth. He was that addicted. He was that
That if you kicked him
sick.
out,
He
what?
was that sick that he would die.
So you
So
are
it was
so
my responsibility to fix him. And I'm still not fixed. I had not done enough therapy yet. So for me, this was, oh my gosh, he needs my help. I have to fix him. Whereas really, Amber should have been working on Amber, but instead, oh, look, here's another shiny coin for me to fix. Um, and honestly, I do that's my soul anyway, is I want to help people. I'm always looking to help people. I'm always giving 115% to everybody else and not pouring into my own cup. Like that's something in the last year that I really have had to work on, is pouring back into me. But at this time, I was not doing that. And so all I could see was somebody very sick who, if I put them out, they were going to die. And I just had a bruise, and my bruise could heal. That broken bone could heal. Whether he broke my toe, whether he broke my hand, whether he broke whatever it was, I can heal from that. But he could die. And that again, it never, even the concussions, which were too 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 extraordinary beatdowns, is the only way to describe it. The first one was so bad I should have gone, and I couldn't. And honestly, I did. The first one I had left, and he broke into the house and did the second. 2 weeks later, a retaliatory, and it was so bad that my kids had to call the cops. And
Now, and you know
the
what?
cop, they let the cop in the house, and he's still in the house. He's hiding in my closet. And the cop comes to my bedroom, and he's just like, let me take him. And I'm like, no. Because here was the deal. I knew if he took him, he was coming back for me. And he was coming back for my life the next
Who
time.
was coming back for you?
This guy that I
Well,
was
let me-
involved with.
all right,
because
but
he was so, his drug addiction had him so
Okay.
chaotic, so out of control, that I knew that if
Okay.
the cop took him, that he was going to come back to the house. So instead, I got the cop to leave. He took me to the ER and dropped me off, where the ER is asking me, do you need help? We just saw you 2 weeks ago. You said you fell down the stairs. What happened this time? And I'm like, I tripped over the dog down the stairs again. And they're like, seriously, do you need help? And again, I was too petrified to say anything. So he takes me home, and he left. And that was it. That was it. Once he left, never saw him again. But it was that, even in that fear, in that moment, I have a cop in front of me that I can say, take this man who's just beat, like the cop can see the bruising on me. He can see me swelling. He knows I need to go to an emergency room. And he's telling me he can help me. And I can't even accept it, because I feel like that is another threat to my life in that given moment.
All right, let's stop here.
Mm-hmm.
Cooper, he says, beaten black and blue, how many lawsuits have there been against the guy after Amber's husband? Sorry for the literal hell, but you're right.
Zero. I put him in rehab. I put him in long-term rehab. Like, I got the DA. Once he was arrested, I got the DA to put him in rehab, and that was it.
But Amber, I hope that you and I pray that those of you that are listening clearly understand we cannot fix anybody. Nope. We can only fix ourselves. And
that's why I gave it to them. Like, I mean, it got to a point, because we had broken up, like, he brought me home, and like a week later he left this really violent voicemail, death threat. And that was it. I called the sheriff, and I went to friends that, some of those warning signs, guys, if they start taking you away from everybody, you can't see your friends, you can't see your family. And that's what was going on. So that day I went to a friend's house. I knew I would chicken out. I knew I didn't have the backbone to do it by myself. So I went to a friend's house that I knew she was not going to let me walk out the door the second she saw the bruises on my face. And these bruises were 14 days after the last time he had beat the hell out of me.
All right.
So and coming in the door, she was like, oh, we're calling the sheriff. And we did, right there, right then. And he was arrested.
All right. Now, we've heard the story. And I'm sorry for all that you've gone through. We've got a couple more things we need to talk about. But right now, I want our audience to recognize the signs.
Yes.
One, if you are with someone who is doing everything in their power to keep you from your family, to keep you from your friends, to isolate you, then you want to get away from them. If you are with someone who is belittling you, criticizing you, calling you out of your name, you want to get away from them as soon as you can. If
guessing,
you are with
even
someone,
second guessing, like, are you sure? Are you sure that's how you feel? Like, even that, if they do that on a repeated level of like second guessing everything that comes out of your mouth, that is a warning sign, a big one.
And if you have children, you don't want them involved or in any kind of toxic relationship, because you're teaching them that it's okay.
Yep.
And you don't want to do that. We're going to pause and take a break here. I have a couple of commercials I need to play, and then we will be back. So let's, okay. Joy 365. It is a devotional book for joy restoration. And the visionary is Vanessa Blackwell. She is looking for 365 individuals to write a devotional for joy restoration. And there's a scripture that says, "The joy of the Lord is my strength." And so this book will contain devotions to help restore the joy. Restore the joy. So you can contact Vanessa Blackwell at vrblackwell@gmail.com. vrblackwell@gmail.com. Let her know that you heard it on my show and that you're interested in more information on how you might be an author in her devotional book. And again, it's 365 days of joy restoration. All right. Now, I do have another commercial that I want to play before we get back into our conversation here. So let me pull it up.
Mama knows.
All right. What's happening?
Mama knows. Creates high quality products that are available to be used on multiple textures of hair. Her goal is to bridge the gap to stop people from having to use multiple products because of families with multiple hair types. Her products are currently being used on men, women, children of all ethnicities. Mama Knows products are available at www.mamaknowsproducts.com. That's www.mamaknowsproducts.com. You can also find her on Instagram at Mama Knows Products because, you know, Mama knows what you need.
Knows what you need. Let me tell you about these products. These products are awesome and they smell great. And they're for all ethnicities, boys, girls, and men and women, and all ethnicities. Oh, I'm having a problem with my tongue today. But anyway, they are shampoos, conditioners, moisturizers, health growth serums, all kinds of things. And they smell so good. They are great. So you want to check out Mama Knows Products.com. Mama Knows Products.com. All right. All right. Now back to us, and then I'll come back with a couple more commercials after we talk a little bit more. I want to get on the subject of your son, of your child becoming trans. And I want you to share with us, one, how did you find, what were the circumstances behind you getting that information? How did you, because oftentimes we have to look at, when our kids, we have to look at unconditional love. And
Yep.
so many times parents have children that may go against our beliefs, go against the grain, go against everything they've been taught. But you cannot allow that to keep you from loving your child. So
Right.
anyway, I'm going to give you the floor and let you kind of share some things, okay?
Okay. Yeah, so my son originally, I'd say the first time he came out was probably in junior high, or not junior high, high school, in his junior year, 11th grade. And he just kind of came to me. I think that was by a written letter that time that he had written over and over and over. My kid was an English major, and so there was a lot of writing involved. And when he finally sent it to me, you know, I think in the letter it had stated that this was probably the 100th or 200th or 300th iteration of this letter that he had written. That he'd been trying to work the nerve up to say those things, and pretty much came out and said that he felt like he was probably asexual, agender, maybe pansexual, didn't really know, didn't really care. And coming out of that marriage, probably about 5 years before he came to me with this, I had realized that I had been molded and changed, and that I had all these labels and boxes that had put on me. And when my son had come to me, I'd realized, well, wait a minute, those are just the boxes that I put on him. And it was very easy for me to take that off because I'd already had to do that with myself. I'd already had to unpack that for myself. So it wasn't, if anything, at that time, I really didn't have a whole lot of reaction. It was just kind of like, okay, all right, let me know if that changes, and roll on. And that's exactly what we did. And then skip ahead about 2 years, and toward the middle of his second semester of his freshman year in college, and he sends me an email that he's not okay, and that his mental state is beginning to be affected by this. And by that, he was uncomfortable to get dressed in his dorm. That was an all girls dorm. He was uncomfortable showering in the girls' shower. And the girl that he roomed with had a boyfriend, and they're both there all the time. So, like, he would pretty much tuck himself underneath the covers and stay there. Was beginning to stop going to class, not sleeping. And I was just like, that's it, come home. Done, come home. You don't have to mess up your grades. You don't have to mess any of that up. But he pretty much came out at that time and said, I'm transsexual.
Okay, let me ask
I am a boy.
Okay, so let me ask you, because you mentioned you labeled a couple of things, trans, and then there were a couple other things that you mentioned. Can you define each one of those for us so that we understand?
Asexual is like you're not interested. Again, and you don't really identify with either gender. So he didn't really consider himself male or female. He just considered himself something different. And he was completely okay with that his junior year. And again, my son wasn't involved in relationships and stuff. So I let my kids figure it out. Like, I had been told what to do so much. I was like, no, this isn't. And I also recognized that wasn't my choice. That wasn't my decision to make for him. I don't want anybody telling me who to love, who I'm attracted to, who I can marry, who I can't marry. So I wasn't going to put that on my kid either, who was now entering adulthood. So when he came home from college, that freshman year as transsexual, like, my whole thing was, here was my child telling me I'm a boy. Now, my kid, from the time that they were old enough to start picking out clothes out of the drawer, in the morning, what they wanted to wear, dressed like their brother. Dressed in cargo pants, cargo shorts, wore the baseball tees, did not want pink, did not want frilly, did not want lacy. Anybody that gave him those things, it was never worn. He would wear a dress to, like, Christmas dinner because my mother would have bought it for him, and he would wear that as a kid. But otherwise, he didn't want dresses. He didn't want anything that was feminine. Never played with dolls, never played with Barbies. He played with trucks. He played with Army G.I. Joes. He played with water guns. He played with stuffed animals. He started shaving his own head in middle school, shaving his head, doing his own hair, wore his hair short, spiked, whatever he wanted. From middle school, high school, or his senior year, he finally went to his first dance, and he went to the senior prom, and the theme was Wonderland, or Alice in Wonderland. And so he went as the Mad Hatter. So he had a tux and a top hat for his senior picture. He didn't wear a drape. He wore a tux. So my kid had been telling me all along, without words, that he was a boy.
And how were you responding as you observed?
I let him. Like, I wasn't. The parenting I got, trying to be nice to my parents, the parenting I got was to stay in your lane as a female. As a female in a Southern Free Will Baptist, Christian, Republican, conservative home, you do what you're told. You don't even speak without being told. I told somebody recently, my grandparents, until my great-grandfather died about 6-7 years ago now, dinner every Christmas, even when I was a kid, the men ate first. And the children ate in the kitchen. And then while the women served them, and then the women cleaned up the dishes, reheated all the food, and then they ate. That was my entire life. That's how that was treated. That men were to be honored and, quite frankly, worshipped. And the women were supposed to do everything and keep their mouths shut.
Well, we know that does not exist anymore.
Nope.
We know.
I told somebody, I was like, I opened the door and it's never getting closed again. Like, I don't know that there being another relationship, because it all comes out. It all comes out. I'm not holding it.
And the
thing
is, you know, if you're meant to be in a relationship, the Lord will provide you with the type of person that you need. Now, again, we kind of talked about some of the boundaries that you need to set. Oh, and then we got on the subject of your child. Now, let me ask you. So, how you have 3 children?
3.
Okay, and so all 3 of them are male now, or
no,
boys?
No. The youngest is a female.
Okay, all right, and she's accepted your brother.
Oh, yes. They all did. Like, they're fierce. Let me tell you, do not mess with my kids, like any one of my kids, because the other 2 are going to come in, and between the 3 of them, you don't. Between the bit of me they've got and the bit of their dad they've got, you just don't want to mess with them. They are fierce and loyal to a fault about each other. Yeah, I'd say my youngest daughter is probably, well, no, I'd say they're both equally protective. I was going to say the youngest is probably more protective, but I don't think so. They're equally protective of their brother.
That's wonderful.
You're not going to mess with him. You're not going to mess with him. And the second they start to see something, they're very quick to, let's go. Walk out the door. Nope, we're not doing that.
That's
which
wonderful.
is great. Which is great. Like, I love it.
So,
I love it.
What advice would you give to parents who are, one, questioning, could my child be this way? And 2, how do you approach that conversation when the child may not have approached it with you,
right?
But you're sensing some things. So how do
if you start to sense it and they're not coming to you, the first question is why? Do they feel like they can come to you? And that's often probably the biggest one, because there are so many things that are polarizing against the trans community. So whether you're talking about somebody's political ideologies, whether you're talking about their religious beliefs, whether you're talking about the way they were raised, their families, and a lot of times it's all of the above, right? Coming together, and you're fighting all these things that you believed in to say, these are all saying that loving my kid is wrong, but at the same time, I love my kid. And for me, it was just very easy. The rest of it could fall away. That was my child. It's still my child. At the end of the day, he has always been exactly who he is. I didn't know who I was. I'm still at 46. I'm still figuring out who I am. So I'm not going to sit there and go, you should have it all figured out at 20, at 19, who you are. But at the same time, it definitely wasn't, if you're the parent, it's not your right to go in and say, no, you can't, because it's not your life. And that's a big thing that I have to tell the parents. You need to get the clarity on what are your beliefs, and then take all of it and set it aside, because those aren't your kids' beliefs. Those are yours. And you could have taught them all you want, but we do that with our kids all the time, right? Like, I think when I found out, okay, so my youngest is super smart, right? Super, super, super smart. And so I think already by like kindergarten, I was already making plans for that kid, saying, oh, they're going to be the next president, or they're going to be like the astrophysicist, and they're going to save the planet. And like, I had all these big, big, big ideas for them. My son didn't do any of those. I have a feeling my parents made those same decisions about me, and I didn't do any of the things my parents thought about it either. That didn't mean that what I chose was wrong, and what my child was choosing is wrong.
Let's talk about that for a minute. Mm-hmm. A lot of time, I remember I was a non-traditional college student.
Right, so, me too.
Most of the people, almost all of my classmates, were fresh out of high school
Yep.
or a couple years out,
Yep.
out. And I remember asking so many of them, why did you choose this particular training?
Right.
I can't tell you how many either said, this is everything that everybody in my family has always done, or this is what is expected of me, or I don't know, I just thought it'd be a good thing.
Yeah.
So, what I and when you consider that 85% or better of people who graduate from college never work in the field that they did this training in,
Yep.
parents, please don't try to force your kids to do something and live in your shadow.
Yep. Yep.
Because so oftentimes they're not going to be, if that's not the plan that God has for them, if that's not what drives them and helps them to be all that they can be, then don't try to squash what it is that they want to
Right.
do.
Don't distinguish their light, and that's what you're doing. Like I'm here. I am a health advocate, and well, for example, I'm on your show talking about trans rights. 2 years ago, my mother would have been like, "Oh no, you won't." I would have been 44, and my mother would have still been like, "Oh no, you won't." We don't
The
talk about
guilt
that.
trip. Yeah, the guilt
It's
trip.
a constant guilt trip. But even at my age,
And
so if that can be done to me, then obviously we can do it to our kids at like 18, 19, 20.
and let me say this, because I know that there are parents that lay guilt trips on their grown children, and that is a sign of bullying.
Mm-hmm.
And it can cause so much um, adverse traumatic experiences, even as an adult who is trying to please their parents.
Yep.
When we need to be able to speak up, speak out, and let them know, look, I'm not trying to go against what you want, but right now what's most important is what's best for me. I remember I used to drive Uber, and I had picked up someone from the airport, and while she's in my car, her parents, she's in her mid to late 20s, right? And her parents had dog sat while she was on a business trip, right? So the
Mm-hmm.
parents, so her parents, she calls her parents and tells them that she's on her way to pick up her dog. And they tell her, oh no, we've decided we're going to keep the dog and take him on vacation with us. Right? And she sat in the back of the car just beside herself. I encouraged her to, tell your parents, I mean, I appreciate you having watched my dog, but he's my dog
That's
and
fine.
I'm coming to pick him up, because that guilt trip, laying that guilt trip on people, it's just not right. It's nothing
My
right.
mother was really good about guilt trips. I stayed in my marriage for, I think the first time I wanted to leave, the first affair, I was 4 months pregnant with my second child. And my mother's answer was pray about it. That was actually my entire family's answer for everything, was pray about it.
Well,
And I
but
can
he
remember
also
I
gives
can
us,
I can remember when I finally left the marriage, and I think I was like 32, 33, I think, when that was going on. And I can remember she'd gone down. I didn't go that first Christmas. I just didn't want to hear it from family at all. And my grandmother was, I think, kind of riding me and saying something like, well, she should have tried to work it out. The kids need two parents, blah, 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 blah. And my mother was like, you don't know what she's tolerated. You don't know what she's put up with. You have no idea what she's gone through. None. To say that she needs to continue living in that hell to make you happy.
oh, your mother said this to
My
your
mother said that to my grandmother. And
Oh,
my
okay.
grandmother never said anything about my divorce after that again. But we don't talk about bad things in my family. So they didn't know that he was running around. They didn't know any of that stuff, the controlling, none of that. And quite frankly, my grandmother was in the same kind of relationship with my grandfather. And I looked at it.
A
I
cycle.
looked at it, and this is exactly what I told my mom. I don't want to be grandma. I don't want to be married to a man that I don't want to be married to a man. When I'm celebrating my 25th, my 45th. Look back, why did I do this? I don't want to be that woman anymore. And I've been doing it for over a decade.
Yeah. So let me say this to my listening audience. Clearly hear what we're talking about and recognize and you know, Amber, you went through a lot. You stayed in situations when you knew better, but you stayed because you needed, there were some lessons that you needed to learn so that you could teach other people. You can't teach what you don't know. You can't share where you haven't gone. So understanding and being able to say, this is what I know now. And I did pull up that poem. And so now that we've talked, we got back on relationships. I want to share this poem before we get off tonight. So this is it. And I've shared it before, but it doesn't hurt to share it again. So after a divorce or end of a relationship, make sure for the future you are fully equipped. By taking time for self, put the thought of jumping into something serious on the back shelf. Get to know who you are all over again. Learn to be your best friend. What is it that's important to see? What are my values, must haves, and beliefs? What part did I play in the demise? What lessons must I learn to make me wise? How did I handle my partner's behavior and mine? Was it hurtful or kind? I must accept my contributions. I must accept the reality, not my illusion, and recognize the mistakes of the past to move forward, not too slow, not too fast. Who am I? What do I want in life? More peace, prosperity, less strife. Faith in the relationship with my higher power begins the new journey this present hour. Peace will come when my faith is realized. Prosperity in my pocket, my soul, and my mind. So, as we talk about relationships, as we talk about boundaries, as we talk about recognizing those things that can be red flags, when you in a relationship, think about your kids, think about yourself, and think about, you know, not jumping into something else. And one of the things that I often share is when you have children and you're out of a relationship, don't jump back in with somebody moving in and meeting your kids like right away. Give it some time. Get to know yourself, get to know those people before interjecting and insinuating your children into those relationships.
Oh, I learned on that one. I didn't do it again. I was like, nope, I'm done. Not until they move out. Nope, 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 nope.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, and let's see. Oh, first of all, let me do this. Amber, yay. Okay, Global Media, she says, yay, Amber, great to see you share your wisdom with us on live stream. Yes. And then Cooper Gates says, Vera Thomas, MA. Oh, crud. He mass played a con of a gentleman and lured you into marriage, then unleashed fury. Yep, that's what happened. But fortunately, I was able to get out of it before my son recognized. And the other thing, when you've gone through a bad situation, don't insinuate your kids. Don't share with them all the stuff that you went through with their dad,
right?
Or with their mom, because
that's not their relationship. That's yours.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Exactly.
It really is. I mean, that was my oldest overheard some things right there at the very, very end. But for the most part, I mean, they always picked up that his treatment of me was not good in my marriage. Like that just wasn't. Everybody walked on eggshells by the end.
Right.
I think I told somebody that dinner used to be Russian roulette, and I like literally you wondered who was going to get insulted, who he was going to tear apart at the dinner table. You would sit down, eat as fast as you could, and run pretty much from the table. But I can remember several times having the fork in my hand and just thinking, I wanted to put it through his eye.
Oh my God.
So he would leave my children alone. So he would leave my children alone. And not having that voice, and at that time, not having the confidence or the voice yet to be able to say, that's enough. You can't do this. And I literally, like, you know, I tell people, like, I made the decision to leave 4 years before I left my marriage, but I had to work to get that confidence up to even get there. And that was from going to speak to attorneys. That was going to speak to counselors.
Yeah.
That was even my family by then supporting me to get out, but it still took me 4 years to get out. And then 2.5 years, he would not let me get a divorce, would not, like, refused to sign the divorce papers. And so in North Carolina, you have to be separated 395 days. We're the second longest period of time in the country. So you have to be separated 395 days to get a divorce. It took me 2 3/4 years to get him to sign the divorce papers.
Wow. Well, you know what? Thank God you've gone through it and you've gotten past it, you've gotten over it, and you've learned lessons, and your children are happier, healthier, and wiser because you made the decision to leave. And we're running out of time. So I'm going to give you the next couple of minutes to just kind of share some last words with our audience. And audience, we will, I did want to pull up your logo regarding your organization on, here it is. Yes. Mama Bear and supporting your trans child. This is Amber's organization, and you can reach her. I've got her information scrolling along down at the bottom. You can reach her on LinkedIn. She does lives on LinkedIn on a regular basis. So be in touch with her and let her share the things that she's doing and how she can help support you as you support your trans child. So Amber, I'm going to give you the floor to kind of just share some last words, and then we'll say good night.
Yeah, I guess the last words that I would say, for any parent out there, it's scary. Today's society, the times that we're in, the political legislation, there's over 500 this year targeting trans kids or the transgender community in general. And it's scary. So I think one of the first things when a kid comes to their parents, or when the parents suspect that their child is transgender, there's a lot of fear wrapped around it. And I think one of the key things that I can tell you as a parent who did that is that's your fear. That's not their fear. And you don't have the right to project your fear onto your kid. Their world is hard enough. They've got enough that they're dealing with already. And so I would say that's probably one of my biggest ones and the second is, getting clear on what are you're against it. If you're against it, if you're having a hard time, if you're struggling to accept your child, take the trans off of it. They're still your kid. They didn't change. That kid you gave birth to, or the kid you adopted, or however that child came into your care, that child has the right to figure out who they are just like you did. And you do not want to squash that, because if you squash that, you're not only squashing your relationship, you're squashing your child. And the mental health, that is one of the biggest problem, or I wouldn't say problems, but one of the largest concerns for transgender youth is 70% of them have thought about suicide.
Yes. And
40% have attempted. They are the largest swath of our homeless youth are LGBTQ because they've not been accepted. And so they've run from their homes. And that is what my room is about, is opening the door so that hopefully you can have that conversation so you don't reject your kid. Don't kick your kid out.
And
it's your duty to love your kid. It's your duty.
Absolutely. And this is something we talked about a lot of stuff. We ran out of time now.
Right.
And one thing I do want to say, please support the Vera Thomas Show by donating Cash App, $ is still great, PayPal or Venmo at BT1117, PayPal, the Vera Thomas Show, 1117@gmail.com. And someone asked, am I still airing Mama Bear audio events? Okay. Are you still doing
I'm
Bear?
still doing those on Tuesday nights.
Okay,
Yes.
awesome.
I do
On
those
Tuesday
every
night.
Tuesday. I think that's probably they're getting me to remind you. So, or the
Okay.
audience. So I do that event every Tuesday night. It was from 8 to 10, and I have just moved it it's going to be from 9 o'clock until 10:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Tuesday
Okay.
nights.
Right.
But I have another show that is similar that I have now been invited to, that I go to that one as well, so that we can kind of piggyback and share experiences in both rooms. So I just kind of moved mine a little bit. But yes, if you want to come, 9 o'clock on Tuesdays.
On LinkedIn?
On LinkedIn.
Okay. So listen, go to and find Amber Holloway on LinkedIn, and also find me, Vera Thomas, and connect with us.
Right.
And thank you very much for this time. And Amber, if you would hold on
Yes.
as I close out. So thank you all. We'll see you on Tuesday. Have a great weekend.
The Vera Thomas Show. The Vera Thomas Show. The Vera Thomas Show. The Vera Thomas Show. Let's talk about it. 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 On the Vera Thomas Show. Let's talk